The story takes place during World War II. A young man named Desmond had enlisted in the army, just like everyone else, determined to serve his country. When he arrived at the training camp, he had no idea about the tough journey that awaited him. Suddenly, their drill sergeant burst into the room, shouting so loudly it could have deafened anyone nearby. A soldier named Smee, who had been carelessly playing with a knife, got so startled by the sergeant's sudden entrance that the blade ended up stabbing his own leg. Another soldier didn't even have the chance to put his clothes on. Sergeant Howell was the exact kind of soldier you see in war movies: loud, short-tempered, and constantly mocking people's looks. Desmond found his strange behavior oddly amusing, but anyone who failed to get dressed on time faced punishment. That meant their first training session had to be done completely naked. At the start of their training, the soldiers were taught various knot-tying techniques so they could fasten ropes efficiently under pressure, an essential survival skill. Desmond had a hard time keeping up with this part. However, having grown up in the mountains, he excelled in the physical drills like running and jumping over obstacles. Everything seemed to be going well for him so far until they reached the weapons training. This was where the real problem began. Desmond, standing firm on his beliefs, refused to even touch a gun. Hearing this, Sergeant Howell immediately dragged him to Captain Glover's office. Desmond explained to the captain that he had been promised he wouldn't have to handle weapons and that he couldn't work on Saturdays as that day was devoted to God. Captain Glover laughed, realizing that it would make no sense to take a soldier like Desmond into battle when he refused to follow even the most basic army rules. Following that, Desmond was sent for a psychological evaluation since the captain considered him unfit for service. Meanwhile, Sergeant Howell continued to insult and humiliate the soldiers during training. He made sure everyone knew about Desmond's refusal to fight. "This gentleman wants to go to war, but doesn't want to fight," he shouted sarcastically. He warned the men never to trust Desmond with any responsibility in combat. That night, before lights out, Desmond sat quietly, looking at a picture of his fiancée tucked inside his Bible. Smitty, one of the soldiers, snatched the Bible from him, but Desmond didn't lose his temper. He simply said calmly, "Give it back to me, brother." The next day, Desmond went through his mental evaluation. He told the doctor that he was perfectly fine. No illness, no madness. He was just different because he believed in God. The doctor quickly realized Desmond wasn't insane and therefore couldn't be discharged on that basis. If he wanted to serve as a medic instead of a combat soldier, the army could allow it, provided he passed all his training. However, Captain Glover's ego got in the way. Determined to get rid of him, Glover ordered Howell to make Desmond's training even harsher. From that day forward, Desmond was given the hardest, most exhausting tasks. He was even forced to clean the toilets. One morning, Howell flipped Desmond's bed over and canceled everyone's upcoming leave, blaming it all on Desmond. The soldiers were furious. That night, while Desmond was asleep, several of them surrounded him and beat him badly. Smitty watched from a distance, puzzled. He wondered why Desmond still wanted to go to war. The man wasn't getting any respect. Everyone hated him. People were even abusing him. So why wasn't he giving up and going home? The next morning, Sergeant Howell noticed that Desmond's body was covered in bruises and wounds. Feeling a rare moment of pity, he asked gently, "Son, why don't you just leave this place? Go home." But Desmond firmly replied, "No matter what happens, I'll still go to war to save my country." He didn't even name the soldiers who had beaten him. Instead, he calmly said, "I fell down. That's how I got these injuries." When training ended, all the other soldiers were discharged, but Desmond was not. Instead, he was arrested for refusing to obey orders. Meanwhile, back home, his fiancée Dorothy was waiting for him on their wedding day. When he didn't show up, she immediately sensed that something was wrong. She knew Desmond wouldn't leave her without a word. In prison, Desmond sat broken and exhausted. Captain Glover came to see him and offered him a deal. If Desmond admitted he was wrong, he would be released without punishment. But Desmond stood his ground. "I can't admit to something that's wrong." Soon after, Dorothy came to visit him. The real reason for his arrest was simple. He had refused to handle a gun, and without firing one, his training remained incomplete. Dorothy pleaded with him, saying, "Why don't you just agree for now? Once you're done with training, you won't ever have to use a gun again." But Desmond's decision didn't waver. He wasn't always this calm and strong-willed, though. Once upon a time, he had been a very hot-headed child. To show how he became the man he was, the story now travels back in time. We see a young Desmond growing up with his brother, Hal. Their mother, Bertha, was deeply religious, while their father, Tom, was a retired soldier haunted by his war memories. One afternoon, Desmond and Hal got into a heated argument that quickly turned violent. In a burst of anger, Desmond grabbed a brick and threw it at his brother's head. The brick struck Hal's forehead hard. He barely escaped death. Although Hal survived, that moment changed Desmond forever. He realized how dangerously close he had come to killing his own brother out of rage. Overwhelmed with guilt, he cried in his mother's arms, and the deep remorse he felt that day stayed with him for life. From that day on, the shoreward boy began transforming into a calm, compassionate man. Years later, we see Desmond working at his local church. One day, he witnessed a terrible accident nearby. Without hesitation, he rushed to the injured man, used his belt as a makeshift tourniquet to stop the bleeding, and helped carry the man to the hospital. The doctor there praised Desmond for his quick thinking, saying his presence of mind had saved a life. Watching the doctors and nurses work so selflessly awakened something deep inside him, a long-buried dream. Desmond had always wanted to become a doctor, to help others, but life had never given him that chance. That same day, he met a nurse named Dorothy. The moment he saw her, he fell in love. He looked for any excuse to talk to her, and when he found out that donating blood could help him start a conversation, he didn't hesitate for a second. He rolled up his sleeve and said with a smile, "Take as much as you need." The next day, Desmond returned to the hospital just to see Dorothy again. During their conversation, he finally gathered the courage to ask her out. Dorothy, who had already noticed his kind heart and humble nature, agreed, marking the beginning of a beautiful connection between the two. Their first date went beautifully, though Desmond, who had spent most of his life around his brother and not women, was still awkward and shy in conversations. He genuinely enjoyed Dorothy's company. On the way back home, however, Desmond suddenly leaned forward and kissed her, catching Dorothy completely off guard. Startled, she said softly, "It's not that I didn't like it, but you should have asked for permission first." Despite the awkward moment, their bond only grew stronger from there. As their relationship deepened, Dorothy began lending Desmond her medical books. This sparked Desmond's interest even more in learning about medicine and how to save lives. A few days later, his brother Hal surprised everyone when he announced, "I've joined the army. I've signed up to go to war." He hadn't told anyone earlier because he knew his family would try to stop him. Their mother, Bertha, despised the word war. She always believed that taking another person's life was a sin against God. When their father, Tom, saw Hal dressed in a military uniform, old memories flooded back. Painful memories of his own time as a soldier. He had fought in the previous war and lost nearly all his closest friends. Those experiences scarred him deeply. After the war, Tom became bitter, withdrawn, and eventually took to drinking to numb the pain. Seeing his son now following that same path filled him with disgust. In a fit of rage, Tom threw Hal out of the room, refusing to speak to him. Desmond then went to his mother and said calmly, "Mom, I'm joining the army too, but not to take lives, to save them. I want to go as a medic." His mother was taken aback, but she could see the sincerity in his eyes. The next day, Desmond told Dorothy about his decision. She was upset, not because she didn't believe in his purpose, but because she feared losing him. "Why would you risk your life like that?" she asked. Desmond replied with quiet conviction, "The country needs us, Dorothy. If we don't stand up, then who will? But before I go, I want to marry you." Dorothy was stunned by his sudden proposal, but after a moment, she smiled and said yes. Their wedding date was soon set. Before leaving for the war, Desmond went to visit his father, who was standing silently near the graves of his fallen comrades. His face was hard and filled with grief. "They were all fools," Tom said bitterly. "They talked about killing and dying for their country, and now look at them." His voice cracked with emotion. Deep down, Tom couldn't bear the thought of burying one of his sons. He didn't believe Desmond would return alive either, because after nearly killing his brother years ago, Desmond had sworn never to harm anyone again. And in Tom's eyes, a man who wouldn't fight couldn't survive a war. Finally, the day came for Desmond to leave for training. Before he left, Dorothy handed him a small Bible with her photograph tucked inside, a symbol of her faith in him and their unbreakable love. We already know what happened next during his training: the harsh punishments, the mockery, and the struggle he faced for refusing to touch a gun. Now, Desmond sat in prison, and Dorothy was desperately trying to figure out a way to free him. When she couldn't come up with any solution, she decided to contact Desmond's parents for help. The next day, Desmond's father, Tom, arrived at Fort Jackson, dressed in his old military uniform. His chest gleamed with his medals, symbols of his own sacrifice and service. Without hesitation, he demanded to meet his former commanding officer, who was now a brigadier. Meanwhile, Desmond's court-martial began. Despite the pressure, he stood firm and maintained his innocence. Just as his sentence was about to be declared, Tom entered the courtroom, holding a letter from the brigadier himself. The letter reminded the officers of a fundamental truth. According to the Constitution, every citizen has the right to refuse anything that violates their personal beliefs or conscience. Everyone in the room fell silent. The letter made it clear that Desmond had done nothing wrong by following his faith. It was his right to serve his country in a way that aligned with his convictions, not against them. The scene shifts to the battlefield, horrifying and heart-wrenching. Piles of corpses were being dragged away as if they were nothing more than trash. In that chilling moment, Desmond finally realized the grim truth. He and his unit had been sent to replace the soldiers who had already been slaughtered here. The few survivors from the previous division were now merged with Captain Glover's unit. It was there that Desmond met two more medics, who briefed him about the situation at hand. They spoke of a place called Hacksaw Ridge, a stretch of land that had already swallowed countless American lives. The U.S. Army had tried to capture Hacksaw Ridge 6 times, but each attempt ended in devastating defeat. Desmond also learned something even more horrifying. The Japanese soldiers deliberately targeted medics. Their goal was to prevent the wounded from receiving help. Because of this, Desmond was forced to remove the Red Cross symbol from his uniform to avoid becoming a visible target. He was even given a helmet for the first time, though he knew it offered only limited protection. Within a few days, their unit reached the base of Hacksaw Ridge. Capturing this place was crucial. If they succeeded, the entire island would soon be under U.S. control. The moment the order came, American artillery began bombarding the Japanese defenses. Thick smoke covered the sky, and the smell of burning filled the air. Taking advantage of the chaos, Glover's unit began their climb toward the ridge, ready for what they thought would be a manageable battle. But they were wrong. As they advanced upward, the Japanese launched an overwhelming counter-bombardment. Explosions ripped through the air, dirt flew everywhere, and soldiers began falling one after another. Chaos spread through the ranks. Amid the screaming and bloodshed, Desmond ran from one wounded man to another, dragging the injured to cover, patching up bleeding limbs, doing everything in his power to save whoever he could. Time and again, the enemy nearly killed him, but somehow he survived, often thanks to Smee, who kept fighting beside him and pulling him out of danger whenever he could. Smee risked his own life multiple times to protect Desmond, and each time their bond grew stronger. As the day bled into night, the brutal fighting finally slowed. The Americans decided to hold their positions and camp until dawn. Howell warned everyone to stay put. No wandering around, no unnecessary heroics. Stay in your foxholes, he said. If you step out there, you're dead. But Desmond couldn't rest. He knew that out there, beyond the smoke and the darkness, dozens of wounded men were still alive, crying for help, bleeding out. Ignoring the danger, he quietly slipped away into the night, determined to save as many as he could. Crawling across the deadly terrain, he pulled soldier after soldier back to safety. Eventually exhausted and covered in blood, Desmond returned to rest with Smitty. By now, Smitty's view of Desmond had completely changed. Watching Desmond risk his life over and over without hesitation, all just to save others, filled Smitty with deep admiration and respect. They shared a few quiet laughs, and for the first time, genuine friendship grew between them. Later that night, Desmond drifted into a troubled sleep, haunted by the horrors of battle. In his dream, he saw the enemy creeping toward their pit, attacking and killing them both. He woke up shaking and told Smitty about it. Smitty listened and said in disbelief, "Even in your dreams, you didn't pick up a gun, even when they were about to kill us. You're one incredible man, brother. There's nothing else you could have done." Hearing this, Desmond decided to open up. He told Smitty about his past, how his father had been an alcoholic, how he used to beat Desmond's mother, and how Desmond had endured it for years until one day he couldn't take it anymore. During one of his father's drunken rages, Desmond grabbed his gun and pointed it at him. But instead of feeling powerful, he felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and fear. In that moment, his father broke down crying, collapsing to his knees. Desmond's voice softened as he said, "That day I realized what this gun had done to my father. The war had already killed his spirit. He lost all his friends because of that weapon. From that moment, I swore I would never touch a gun again, not for anything." Smitty, in turn, shared his own painful story. He confessed that he never really knew his father either. His mother had abandoned him at an orphanage when he was just a child. Life had been cruel to him too, and that was why he found it hard to trust anyone. Before they could speak more, the sky began to lighten. Morning had arrived, and with it, a fresh wave of horror. The Japanese army launched a massive counterattack, catching the Americans completely off guard. The American troops were still barely awake when the relentless Japanese bombardment resumed. Due to the heavy shelling, Captain Howell ordered an immediate retreat. The Navy provided cover fire to protect them, but the Japanese unleashed their most brutal assault yet. Amid the chaos, Smitty was gravely injured, yet Desmond refused to abandon him. He lifted his wounded friend and carried him to safety through the hail of bullets. With no other choice, the American army completely withdrew, descending from the ridge. Desmond could have left with them, but he didn't. The cries of the dying and wounded men still trapped above echoed in his ears. He made a decision. He would save every last one of them. Captain Glover was leading the retreat and gathered the remaining soldiers to move out, leaving just a few men behind to hold the position. Desmond, despite his fear, pushed forward alone into the smoking ruins of the battlefield. One by one, he located the wounded, tied them to a rope, and lowered them down the cliff to safety. When Glover realized what Desmond was doing, he ordered covering fire from the cannons to protect him. But that also exposed Desmond, Glover, and the others to enemy sightlines. They were now visible targets. A counterattack was imminent. Still, Desmond didn't stop. He continued rescuing men under heavy fire. Trucks soon arrived below to collect the soldiers he was sending down. Even as Japanese troops crept closer, Desmond pressed on. Spotting another wounded man nearby, he quickly smeared him with mud to hide him from the enemy, and then lay a corpse over himself as camouflage. The trick worked. The Japanese soldiers passed by without noticing them. When they were gone, Desmond pulled the man out and lowered him down the escarpment. Meanwhile, Glover desperately begged his superiors for reinforcements, but help was slow to come amid the chaos of war. Still, Desmond kept going. He wrote a brief letter, prayed, and descended once more into danger. This time, the Japanese spotted him. Under heavy fire, Desmond dived into a nearby tunnel, one used by the enemy for stealth movement. Inside, he found a wounded Japanese soldier. As enemy troops marched past, Desmond hid silently until they were gone. When he turned, he saw the injured man suffering terribly. But to Desmond, he wasn't an enemy, just another soul in pain. He administered morphine and bandaged the man's wounds before moving on. By the time Desmond emerged from the tunnel, night had fallen. Yet even darkness couldn't stop him. Hour after hour, he kept rescuing soldiers, lowering them carefully down the cliff. His hands were raw, torn, and bleeding from the rope, but he refused to stop. By morning, Captain Glover looked out over the field and, to his astonishment, saw that dozens of wounded men had been saved through the night. A wounded soldier told the others that the man they had once mocked as a coward had done everything alone. Soon after, Desmond found Captain Howell and another injured soldier, both still alive but badly wounded. Howell urged him, "Come back for me later. Save him first." Desmond obeyed, carrying the other man to safety before returning for his captain. As he approached Howell, a Japanese sniper spotted Desmond and fired. The bullet grazed his helmet, but miraculously, he survived. Howell still had his rifle and ammunition. Risking his life, Desmond ran into the open to expose the sniper's position. The plan worked. Once Howell located the enemy, he fired a perfect shot, taking the sniper down. Seizing the moment, Desmond dragged Howell towards safety, but the enemy soon spotted them, triggering another intense exchange of gunfire. Howell kept firing back while Desmond guided him carefully toward the cliff's edge. When they finally reached the ropes to descend, Japanese soldiers began shooting at them from above. Just then, American troops waiting below opened fire, neutralizing the attackers and covering their descent. With that, Desmond had finally brought down every last survivor from the ridge. When he reached the bottom, everyone looked at him with awe and deep respect. He had been rescuing men tirelessly for hours, maybe days, without rest. Exhausted and barely conscious, he was carried to the medical tent where it was discovered that the other medic had not survived the battle. Later, Captain Glover came to see him. "Brother, you're a great man. I forgive the way I treated you before. No one else could have done what you did for this country. We're heading back up tomorrow, but tomorrow's Saturday, your day of prayer. If you'd rather not go, we'll understand." Desmond, with quiet determination, replied, "No, I'll go." The next morning, the entire unit waited patiently for Desmond to finish his prayer before advancing. When the attack began, the Americans caught the Japanese completely off guard. Reinforcements arrived, and thanks to Desmond's earlier discovery of the tunnel, they had a major tactical advantage. This time, the battle turned in their favor. However, some Japanese soldiers pretended to surrender, waving a white flag as they approached. It was a trap. They suddenly hurled grenades toward the Americans. Desmond, reacting instantly, grabbed one grenade and threw it back, but it exploded mid-air, wounding him badly. His comrades rushed to his aid, lifted him onto a stretcher, and began evacuating him. During the evacuation, his cherished Bible slipped from his grasp, but even in pain, Desmond reached out and managed to retrieve it. In the end, the American forces triumphed and Hacksaw Ridge was finally secured. This is the incredible true story of Desmond Doss, the man who, without ever firing a gun, saved 75 lives single-handedly. He became the only soldier in history to change the course of a battle without picking up a weapon. Without him, those 75 men would have perished. For his his extraordinary bravery and unwavering faith, Desmond Doss received the Medal of Honor, America's highest award for valor in wartime. Yo, if you made it this far, you're a legend. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell because the next movie recap is going to blow your mind.